Alright, so today you and I are going to be factoring trinomials on page 87, numbers 1 through 12 in the Math 1 book. First off, to factor a trinomial, basically what you want to do is find the product of the third number that adds up to the second number. Or what people will say, what's the product of C that adds up to B? But unfortunately, this one starts out with a negative A coefficient, so actually you're going to have a greatest common factor to take out first. So what you're going to do is take out a negative 1 out of all three of these terms. And when you take it out, you're going to be left with x squared plus 3x. See how the sign changed here, and then the sign's going to change here, minus 28. Alright, so from there we just leave this negative outside, and then we are going to factor what's inside here. So what multiplies into negative 28 adds up to positive 3. Well, let's think about our factors of 28. 14 and 2, 7 and 4. And when you think of 7 and 4, you also have to think about 3, don't you? Because 7 minus 4 is 3. So I bet that's going to be it. It's going to be a 7 and a 4. And notice that this first x squared, to get x squared, we're just going to be multiplying x times x. X times x is x squared. But now, we got to think of those numbers. We said 7 and 4. So I'm just going to write 7 and 4 because that's typically the order we think about them in. And so now, which one of these has to be negative if it adds up to positive 3? Well, I'm sorry, which one has to be positive then? So it's going to be positive 7 minus 4. Because I need this to have the greater absolute value, because 7 minus 4 gives you that positive 3. So there you go. Okay, so now the theory is that if I were to FOIL this back out, I get exactly what you see in the parentheses above, and then if I were to distribute that negative sign through, it will give me exactly the problem we started out with. Okay, so number 2, it also has a negative sign out front, so that's the first thing I take care of is I factor that out. So now I have p squared minus 8p plus 12, and now I have to think of the factors of 12 that add up to 8. Well, when I think of 12, I often think of 6 and 2, well, the factors are 12, 1, 6 and 2, and then also 4 and 3. Which one of those might add up to 8? And your initial response, I'm sure, is 6 and 2. But now we have to think about the signs. Well, it multiplies into a negative number. So if it's multiplying into a negative number, so one of these has to be negative and one of them has to be positive. So if I tried negative 6 and positive 2, is that going to add up to 12? Well, it's going to multiply up to negative 12, but it's not going to add up to 8. So you see the problem there. Negative 6 plus 2 adds up to negative 4. So this is not actually factorable with 6 and 2. And if you tried it the other way, positive 6 and a negative 2, that's not going to work. 4 and 3, that only adds up to 7. 12 and 1 adds up to either 11 or 13. So what else can we do with this? Well, the good news and the bad news is that actually that's all we can do is take the negative sign out. So actually our answer for this question, even though we attempted to go further, we can't actually go any further than that. All we do is take that negative sign out. Alright, so let's see what happens on number 3. Take out a negative, and I'm left with m squared plus 13m plus 40. So still have my negative, and now I have to multiply up to 40. So think about your factors of 40. Now you can think really small if you want, or you can think a little bit bigger. But most people think 1 and 40, or 2 and 20, and so forth. However, you're going to need them to add up to 13. So think of your factors of 40 that add up to 13. You might eventually get there, and you're going to get quicker and quicker at this. So for example, when I see this, I see 8 and 5 almost immediately, because I know that has to add up to 13, and I know that 8 plus 5 equals 13. So that's what I'm going to do. It's m plus 8, m plus 5. 8 times 5 is 40, 8 plus 5 is 13, and I've already factored a negative out, so that's it for my final answer for number 3. Scroll on up here to number 8. So this one doesn't have a negative out front, but it does have a GCF. The GCF is positive 2, I think. Positive 2. So now we have 5n squared left over, 5n squared minus 13n plus 6. I may not have given myself enough room to do this problem, but from here what you're going to want to do is use something called the Lizzie Method. The Lizzie Method is where you rewrite the question so that you multiply the first term and the last term, and you don't write the first coefficient anymore. So you multiply the first coefficient and the last and the constant here. So you say that it's n squared minus 13n plus 30. Okay? This is the beginning of the Lizzie Method. And now this looks like a trinomial that you know how to factor. What are the factors of 30 that add up to 13? You probably you might say 15 and 2, and then you say, well, that could work, but it has to multiply to be a positive number, and positive 15 times positive 2 would add up to 17. Negative 15 times negative 2 would add up to negative 17, so that's not going to work. So let's think about 10 and 3. Positive 10, positive 3 adds up to positive 13. So now we're just going to make both of those negative. So 2 times n minus 10 n minus 3, because negative 10 times negative 3 equals positive 30, and they add up to negative 13. Okay? Now, do you remember the 5 that you multiplied by initially? Well, that's what you're going to have to divide by here as well. So I'm going to be dividing by 5 in these factored terms. And if you can reduce the fraction, reduce the fraction. If you cannot reduce the fraction, you move the 5 out front, in front of the n. Not all the way out front, just in front of the n here. So I'm going to write the final answer right here, and it might have to be small, but here it is. 2 n minus 2 times 5n minus 3. Again, it's n minus 2 because you reduce fractions if at all possible. Always reduce the fractions if possible. This fraction here was not able to be reduced, so you just slip the 5 out front in front of that n.